Ridley Scott made this film that I think just stunned the world, and I was one of the people who was stunned by it when I saw it. And a few years later, when I became a filmmaker myself, I actually, saw an opportunity when I was asked to write the second one to, I wanted to make a film like that. I was so impressed by the world that he created, the characters that he created, and the design. But I think that there are many accomplishments in that first film, and he really set the bar very high for science fiction in general.
We had been planning on doing a sequel, I mean, right away. Well, Alan Ladd was there talking about it already. And then he left, and I think this was when Marvin Davis bought the studio, and there was Norman Levy, who was running it, and Sherry Lansing, I guess. She had less to do with it. It was Norman Levy who was really opposed to it, I was later told. And they just didn't want to do it. And, so we weren't pushing for it. We had an idea about how to do it, and we thought they should do it, but we didn't think that was really. And finally, there was another change of management and another, new group that came in. And one of them stopped me in the parking lot when he said, I knew him. He said, "You guys have been talking about Alien. He said you had. So what do you want to do?" So I kind of told him the story that was a cross between Southern Comfort that Walter and I had made since and the Magnificent Seven that we were working on at the moment. And he said, "Great, that sounds fine." Good. So we then all had we all had a meeting, and we were on.
When we were casting Terminator and we found Arnold Schwarzenegger, we were going to start shooting in summer of 1983, and we were going to shoot in Toronto. However, Dino De Laurentiis had a preemptive option on Arnold to star in Conan 2, The Destroyer. He'd already made the big hit Conan the Barbarian, and he preempted Arnold to star in that film, which meant that we couldn't start shooting for about 9 months. Now, that wasn't enough time to do another movie, but it was enough time for Jim to take on a writing assignment.
I had met Jim Cameron because Larry Wilson, who was our head of development, sent me this pile of scripts with a big recommendation for The Terminator. And so I read The Terminator, and I thought it was real good. And then at one point, I think when we really were now looking for a writer on Alien 2, I thought, well, why not him? He'd probably be, he knows this movie, back the first one, probably better than I do, backwards and forwards, So I asked him if he wanted to write that, and yeah, he did. And I tried to get Fox then to take an option on him as a director. They didn't. And he, wrote a draft of Alien, and then he went off to make The Terminator.
By the time we started shooting, however, he'd written about 90 pages, and he was still in the second act, and it wasn't a completed script. However, the people at Fox read it and loved it and said, "You know what? We're going to do the unthinkable. We're going to wait. We're going to wait until you're available to finish the script. And if your directing debut is, well, it really wasn't a debut in that he'd already directed Prawn to the Spawning, but if this film turns out well and you demonstrate talent in the directing field, we'll also let you direct." I'm not sure they were telling us the truth at the time, but we chose to believe it. We were naive, and I think that in Hollywood, when you're starting out, it helps to be naive and idealistic and believe that people are telling you the truth. And in this case, it turned out to be something that came to pass. If Terminator hadn't been such a success when it premiered, I doubt that Jim would have been brought on to direct.
I had worked for Roger Corman at his studio in Venice, and we did a film called Galaxy of Terror, which was Roger's definitive paean, to be charitable, to Alien. And I had worked on that film with some people that are actually involved in this production, and studied the design of the film. And I had already worked as a production designer before that. And I was working as a designer and an effects man, Aliens seemed to really bring it all together in terms of design, and that's what attracted me to the project, the opportunity to create another world, basically.
From the time we thought about tackling it, Jim's perception was, we're doing a sequel, we're not doing a remake. We're not trying to do a gothic horror film, we're going to do a combat movie. And that was how we perceived being respectful of the original vision of Ridley Scott and not trying to remake it.
The fans of the first film are so powerful in their, I mean, they're so entrenched in the vision that Ridley created for that film, that to do a clone of it, or to take one sort of small baby step away from it, would not do. So what I've tried to do is take what I personally was interested in from that film, certain aspects of the alien's life cycle that interested me, the Ripley character, which interested me greatly because of the fact that it's a strong female character and that sort of thing, and brought into it a whole other area of science fiction that I've also always wanted to see realized, which is the idea of the military in the future.
Sigourney was wary. She wondered, who are these kids who want to make the sequel to a film that she was rightfully very proud of. But from the first meeting, when Jim told her the direction he wanted to pursue, she was interested.
I was making a film in France, and I suddenly got this complete finished script that was all about Ripley and this little girl, and changed the nature somewhat of the aliens, and it was set to go. I mean, it was like, can you start in 3 months? And I remember thinking, I can't believe that no one even mentioned it to me. But I mean, I was thrilled. I met Jim Cameron shortly after that and loved working with him.
Sigourney read my script, my first draft, and she was, on the one hand, very, very critical of certain small things that she said her other character, that her character as established in the other film wouldn't do. And simultaneously, she was very complimentary, saying that she thought that I had really hit her character on the head as long as we cleaned up those details. And she was overall really thrilled with the direction that we'd gone in.
I felt he'd fleshed out the character of Ripley. I think it's hard to write the character of Ripley, because most writers would say, write her like a basketball coach. All right, people, come over here and let's do this. And, it's like, so he really captured her and made her this renegade, and someone who wasn't, 200 years later, her daughter had died. It was a great beginning for the character to feel that kind of isolation and rage, I think.
She came to it when it was visually and dramatically a fait accompli. So I have to give her a lot of credit for not rampaging through it and saying this won't work, that won't work. She approached it as, right, I see the direction you want to take. This is how my character would respond in that situation. So it was a dream for me as a writer. So I took her input on how she would react. She speaking as Ripley, I wouldn't do that, I would do this. Wouldn't I be a little more angry here or softer there, that sort of thing, and applied it all back into the rewrite.
Then there became a contract negotiation in which Fox was not necessarily willing to pay her the amount of money that she wanted, and asked Jim to pursue a storyline that did not include the Ripley character, which he balked at. He refused to do that version.
I think she was always going to do it. I think it was always a question of the money. And I think, finally she had the upper hand, and I know she got paid what she asked for. So.
Ultimately, a deal was done, and we were able to make the movie we all wanted to make, as opposed to one that was, we felt, simply a ripoff rather than a part of what has become, obviously, a very successful series. The great thing about this film is that we actually had enough money to bring in outside consultants, which had not been the case in the films we'd done for Roger Corman or Jim's, or even with The Terminator. And we were always huge fans of two people who were very, very different in their design concept. Sid Mead, who's truly a visionary, and he was able to imagine things that might not necessarily ever work, but looked bitchin'.
In 1985, I was one of the 12 judges for the Miss Universe contest in Florida, and I get a call from James Cameron. Tracked me down through my Los Angeles number, and he said, would you like to work on a science fiction film? Because by that time I'd worked on 2010 and Blade Runner and Tron. And I said, sure. So he FedExes down the script. It's delivered. I stayed up all night reading the script, dynamite script. And as a matter of fact, on the airplane back to Los Angeles, started doing sketches of the Sulaco. If you recall, in Alien, the Ridley Scott film, the Nostromo, looked very much like sort of a moving oil refinery with the towers, and it had no really forward direction axis to it. James wanted something with an axis, a directional axis. So I came up with this spherical thing with this projection off the front with lots and lots of antennas, and proved to be absolutely the wrong direction because of camera focus. Essentially, the thing had to move past the camera lens, and if you had a ball, a spherical shape, the focus would shift from the outline of the craft, the matte line, to the towards the lens. I actually received from him a sketch that he had done of his idea for the Sulaco, and that sort of steered the design to the one that I came up with, which was about an 800-foot long, 900-foot long armed cargo carrier, a rocket gun that carries stuff. That was sort of the theoretical concept underlay for the whole design. And the technology was not that exotic. It's not Star Trek. It's a very real-world, industrial-looking piece of stuff.
Ron Cobb comes from a production design background, and his philosophy was, not only am I going to design it, but I'm going to tell you exactly how you can make this work.
Oh, there was a lot of collaboration with Jim because he always had a sketch or two and contributed. And I was then I'd go into the details, the utilitarian vehicles. We had to kind of put them together both in miniature and also in real life. So we had to make them fairly practical and kind of see all those little touches. And the interior, long interior column, corridors, and I like doing corridors. But I did the airlock and the colony control room. I did all that in the labs. I did all the labs and things, and the operating room, and certainly all of the colony really. The casino and a cafe and the lousy weather and such, and it all just fell into place. The national psyche was still full of Vietnam, so I think that because Jim was going to do it all with colonial police kind of things, that there should be a subliminal Vietnam look. So like the drop ship and the tank, but certainly the drop ship is purposely meant to look a little bit like a Phantom jet and a little bit like a Huey helicopter. And it was touched on by Jim and myself, and we all winked. We got it.
We are confined. When Sid does some of his stuff, it's absolutely mind-boggling. But of course, we are hampered by how much space we've got in the studio.
The great thing about Peter Lamont is that he's able to actually bring these fantastical designs to life. Coming from the Bond tradition, he was able to make anything, no matter how fantastical, practical, and also did things that were outside of the box. We shot at the Acton Power Plant, which was a decommissioned coal generating plant within London. And that was pretty difficult. We found it was a perfect location.
What Jim really liked about it was all the walkways, the stairways were all grilled. So in effect, when you looked down, you could see from top to bottom. There were problems. It was all rusty. It had been deactivated for about 2 years, 3 years, all rusty. But the biggest problem was asbestos, because, all the lagging, it was an old coal-fired one, and it was all covered in asbestos everywhere.
We had to spend a great deal of money with asbestos mitigation to make sure that it was safe for us to film in. I was involved in the casting process from the very beginning because we had to meet everyone who was part of the North American Registry for the British Actors' Equity, as well as anyone who believed that they could do a passable American accent.
It was incredibly hard to do because James Cameron really kept saying state-of-the-art firepower. They've got to be incredibly sort of on the cutting edge of American military. So what often happens here when American actors come to live in England, they become a bit anglicised and they lose that really sort of aggressive edge, if you like, that this sort of casting required.
I think we probably went through 3,000 people before we could even consider bringing anyone over from the United States. Obviously, Sigourney, because she was reprising her role as Ripley, that was one thing. But anyone beyond that, we had to test or eliminate.
And I worked incredibly hard and found some extraordinary people, like Jeanette Goldstein, who was a weightlifter.
I was very much drawn to the role of Vasquez just because I thought she was so interesting. And Jim said that he normally would have written her as a man, or you would normally make the meanest, the baddest, the man, a 6-foot guy with a huge mustache, but he thought it'd be interesting to make it into a woman.
Well, I was just living in London and doing fringe theater, and just got my British Equity card, and and saw this, and yeah, it really did change my life. It brought, put me in the movies and brought me back to the United States and started my, my career on television and film.
I lived in England, went there when I was 17 years old, ostensibly just to do a junior abroad program while I was in college, but ended up living there and training as an actor. Oftentimes it takes, quite a few hours to digest all the details of a script, but this was just like a great novel, a page turner, and I was just wowed. And that's pretty much all I could talk about when I met James Cameron and Gail Ann Hurd was to say, what an amazing script.
Carrie Henn was part of an enormous search to find the character of Newt. Sarah Jackson went everywhere and auditioned kids at schools. And it was difficult, especially to find a little girl who could do anything that would sound like an American accent. Carrie had no acting experience. Her father was stationed at RAF Lakenheath. He was an American, mother's English, and she had never even acted in a school play before.
Well, I was eating lunch, and Sarah Jackson, the casting director, was taking photos of all these young children. And she took my photo, and they had me try out for an audition.
I had never done anything before, never even acted in a school play or anything like that. I just happened to get picked for the job. My parents talked to me and we thought, oh, it's just for an extra part, nothing too big. And they called and asked if I'd like to try out.
We found that the children who had a great deal of acting experience had mostly acted in commercials. And whenever they delivered a line, they'd smile at the end. And it was so inappropriate for this girl who's really suffering from traumatic stress to smile every time she delivered a line. And Carrie had none of that conditioning, so she was perfect.
And they just kept calling me back and calling me back. And they called up and said, you had the part, and kind of an interesting story. Not very many people can say that.
I've seen a lot of the best android characterizations around. I mean, there's been Holmes, and there's been Blade Runner, and there's been, there's even been Metropolis, right? All those different shows. And they're hard acts to follow. I mean, all of them are very good, So I had to dump them right away.
I met with Jim on it, and Gail Hurd was there, and I had to audition for it. But I made a connection with that movie, and I really was trying to play myself when I was 12 years old, that emotional life of a 12-year-old, and I come from a slightly abusive childhood, so when adults were like kind of giving me a rough time, I would look at them and say, well, I'm going to outlive you, so I got to have a little pity on you, you know. So they didn't get to me that deep because I knew that, you know. And in a lot of ways, Bishop was like that. And I thought, that's what I want to bring to the movie. I always over-prepare, you know. I go through a period when I'm going to do a movie where I call it gathering, you know, and you start going on every impulse. Because why do I want to stop any of them? And I went out and had these sclerals made for my eyes that had 2 pupils in each eye. And I remember Jim and I having a lot of conversations on the phone. He was in London already prepping the movie, and he called me once and he said, you know, I'm not sure how to introduce your character. He said, maybe you have the thrumming of the ship and everybody else is in stasis, you know, and maybe this Bishop is just wandering endlessly through the ship. And he called me back a week later and he said, no, you know, you remember that game with the knife between the fingers? So what if he did that? That's the intro, you'll know. And so I practiced for a month. I mean, I split the tops of my fingers, learning how to really go fast. And I got every knife you can imagine. I got ones that open, and I got throwing knives and all these knives. So when I got there, I was ready.
I've known Jim for a few years. I actually was his set decorator on a film about 4 years ago. That's how we met. And when he came along to do Terminator, I was doing more acting then. He got me to do a small part in that.
It's hard to audition for people you know because you have no mystique with them. They know. But I read the script over the 4th of July weekend, and I thought, man, this is great. This is a great part. I remember Jim handed me like a mailing tube for a poster and told me that was my pulse rifle and gave me some direction. I read the scene. Then he gave me some direction. I read the scene again. And then that was it. And I left thinking I'd probably overdone it. I'd probably overacted, and I'd probably never hear from him. And kind of bummed me out. I mean, I thought I was right for the part. And then I got back to California. Weird Science came out, and I got a call from Hildy Gottlieb, my agent at the time, and she says, what do you call a ball that's out? And I go, left field? She goes, yeah, left field. Well, Jim Cameron's going to be calling you in 5 minutes from London. He's just cast you to play Hudson in Aliens. And I couldn't believe it. I remember right where I was in my kitchen in my apartment in Venice. And I think when I hung up the phone, I think everybody in Venice knew I'd gotten the part. And then Jim called me. I guess it was about 10 o'clock at night there. And he said, hey, I'm really excited. And I just didn't want to say anything so that he would change his mind. And 2 weeks later, I was on my way to London.
This was a tremendous role for Bill, and I think one of the most memorable in the film. We wanted to make sure that the Colonial Marines in the film operated like a real unit. That's the kind of thing that you can't just fake.
Jim Cameron got together these special forces guys that not only trained us rigorously in maneuvers, you know, so we looked like soldiers, but we did it as a team too.
We had a great camaraderie with all the guys, you know, the soldiers, the grunts, and it was fantastic. And when we got together, we got 2 weeks before we started to shoot, which is unusual, to hang out and to train and get to know each other.
They were all bonding together to make them seem more like a group, you know, the Marines. And I was the young one, kind of the off-cast, but I just joined in everything that they did. They used to run around the studios, and they'd have the guns underneath their arm, and they'd be running along. And I wanted to be involved, so I'd grab my Cabbage Patch Kid, and I'd run behind them. And I really just wanted to be kind of a part of the whole set, and they really made me feel like I was a part of it.
Al Matthews was actually, I believe, experienced in the military, and he was terrific. But we hired people who trained the entire team as a unit, and it was pretty grueling. It was physical. They went through maneuvers. They went through drills. And Al was their sergeant. And because he had experience actually in the military, he was pretty believable. And I think relished the role.
I would like to think that I was hired because I do my job as an actor. But reality is that because of my military experience, I'm also here. And I think we've done a good job, but we've got a lot of actors here who, you know, have never seen a weapon before in their life. And they're handling it well. I mean, I have to put the boot in every now and then, but that's how it goes.
We had an actual physical fitness routine for them from 8:30 in the morning until 5 o'clock at night. And they were running, weightlifting, calisthenics.
Run us through drills and teach us how to salute and all of that kind of stuff, and to march with all this heavy equipment.
And so we ran around the sculptured gardens at Biehn. Was very incongruous, all these sort of lovely little hedges and things were going, woo, 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 It was really kind of silly, but it was good. It was really good. And the salting stairwells.
We did deployment exercises and stuff like that, and we beat up this equipment pretty good. We did it for a few weeks.
We learned about how to cover people and how to, just so you knew what you were doing, and it looked like you knew what you were doing, soldiering instead of acting soldiering.
The emotional feelings that they are transmitting all the time. We found that it came over very strongly after a couple of weeks.
For the week we spent with each other, 10 days, we ate together and hung out and we worked, and we got to know everyone, joking around with people. Yeah, and it did. You began to feel like you were together in a unit. And now as the film's gone on, I feel like I know all of them.
I was really intimidated to meet Sigourney Weaver. Sigourney Weaver from Alien. She'd gone on to do other things in the interim and become a huge star. And she was really disarming and really friendly and easy to talk to. And it was so nice to me that I always thought I must be screwing up because she was so overly nice. But that's who she is. And she really was the leader of the cast. It was a big ensemble with her in the lead.
Maybe it was a good thing that I wasn't there because all the soldiers were bonding and, figuring out, experimenting with who they were and what their armor looked like and all that stuff. And it's good, I think, that Ripley isn't one of them. And there's sort of distrust on both sides. But it was weird to come in that late. I literally finished one movie and started the other 3 days later.
It was good that we were together first, and Sigourney and Ripley come in later when we're all a unit, and she's the outsider, and it was perfect. And the same thing with Burke and Gorman. It just worked out that way. So it was easy that way because they were outsiders coming in.
I was doing a job before that, and I couldn't actually get in for a lot of the training. But I did, work out with weights and did some of the training with them. Yeah, but I've done a fair bits and pieces of militaristic stuff before.
It's been a lot of fun because I am an outsider and just conspicuously it works physically because as I say, these guys are all in their military gear and I'm a guy with a pencil. So I look at them and I look blazingly inappropriate. And someone told me that the other day, someone asked them why I had been here so long and hadn't worked yet, because they were just walking by the set and they saw everybody in their uniform, and here was I wearing a flannel shirt and a vest. And they said, and not only that, but why is he standing in the shot? He's holding up everything.
Jim was very open in allowing us to develop our characters. I mean, we had a couple of days where we actually did all the dressing of our weapons and painted our little, idiosyncratic bits of stuff on. I mean, I think my gun in the background here, I called it my bitch. I mean, all the stuff, the bones hanging off my hat. Jim had a bunch of stuff on a table, not put together in any specific way, and he just said, have at it, guys. And he left us for 4 or 5 hours, and we had a ball.
I put my girlfriend's name on there. It was Louise. And then I think I had kind of like some kind of a Japanese kind of a love knot. And actually, I didn't paint that stuff on. I kind of drew it, and then Terry English, the armor, had all the stuff laid on and painted on. I think I had something on the back that said something like dispose of properly, or one of those do not rupture, contents under pressure. We had a lot of in jokes like that. Then we were running around being fitted with this armor that was all custom made for us. And I remember Jim had me all suited up in the armor, and he wanted to see just how rugged, how durable it was. So he said, why don't you run down that hallway and just slide into that wall? Okay, Jim. So I ran and slid into the wall. All this stuff broke and came off of me. And he said, this stuff's not ready to go. And so he said to the armors, you got to make this stuff stronger.
The chest burster in the original Alien was one of the most shocking and wonderful effects in film history.
We had to repeat it, but we had to do something a little different.
I actually endeavored on the second picture to make it even less gory than the first one, because I think the chest burster scene is pretty gory in and of itself, although the number of seconds of gore, say, throughout the film is not that great. But I actually tried to pull back even more from that, because I figured, okay, the first film told you what could happen. We don't have to revel in it.
The chest burster is representative of all of the creature effects in the films, that they have all changed slightly. And what you hope you do is you're making it more specific to the story, and that you're making improvements without destroying the original designs of these creatures, which are really just great designs.
We had a copy of the original chest burster from the first film, and the thing that we were noticing in the original sculpture was there was an indication that there were to be arms, little arms on the thing, and I wasn't really aware of them in the film.
Jim did want to add arms to it. He wanted it to look like the hands were helping free itself, pushing itself out. I think he felt that the one in the first one was just a little too larval and a little too disconnected from what it ultimately will become.
You don't create fear with gore. You create disgust. It's a whole different emotion. And I think that certainly for me, the emphasis on the second picture was less on horror and more on terror. We wanted people to experience the fear and the suspense.
I remember going to the lab once, or whatever they called it, where they showed us the face huggers. And then as we were like looking at, the thing, they sort of set it off.
I remember that was a blast to puppeteer that, because it was just such a base reaction. It's ever since you're a kid and you try to scare somebody to make them jump, and knowing that that's exactly what the point was for the audience, that was a lot of fun.
Lance Hendrickson was really good with it.
Yeah, he was fun.
Oh, buddy, what is that you got there? Oh, wow, look at that. And he'd get in there and start working.
Well,
with
we like actors, and the stuff that we make, you have to help them do their job too. So if you make it as real as possible, that gives them something to react to.
In order to create the illusion of these two facehuggers, which are now loose in that room, created a half dozen different forms of this particular creature so that it could have a performance and become a character. Didn't change the design, extended the design, changed what it could do as an actor.
What Jim really wanted was that proximity and the tactileness of it. So there were a few different pieces that we built for that.
We had two hero facehuggers, which had complete mobility of the fingers. It could crawl and reach and try and get at Newt, and try and get at Ripley. Complete action, but operated literally by 6 or 7 puppeteers.
Probably the most complex of the pieces was the running facehugger. And that was, the mechanism for that was built by Rick Lazzarini. It was a very clever mechanism. It was like a pull toy, where there was a couple of pulleys that a cable would run through inside the body. You had another cable that, as you pulled the creature along, the wheels of the pulleys would turn, which would activate cams that made the legs scuttle.
It was, in fact, low-tech, high art, very interesting concept. And this little thing was running at you, running across the room, and it was virtually a pull toy.
I think the biggest design changes when you went from Alien to Aliens was the fact that technically the alien suits were far simplified, and that was in an effort to gain them maximum mobility. Cameron knew exactly how he was going to shoot these things, and he knew how it was going to be sort of an interplay between shadow and light on these things.
We started building in LA, but we'd build the suits, and Cameron would go into the hallway with a guy in a suit, and he'd turn the camera upside down, and we'd look at him, what's he doing? He'd videotape a guy crawling on the floor upside down, and then go, hey, what do you think of this? And then there it is, of course. Oh yeah, crawling on the ceiling, yeah, great. So he was very interested in expanding the capabilities of the creature.
Jim's script had so much more action, things bouncing off walls and doing stuff, so we had to play with the anatomy, camera techniques, reverse shots, looking up, shooting down on wires.
When you look at them in full light, they almost had the feeling of, this like a skeleton costume you would wear for Halloween with the just painted bones. But when you put it in the right environment and when you lit it right, it was just the coolest thing. At that point, then it just became more of a a feeling of an image rather than really focusing on a single a single character.
We tried to recreate the original Giger look, and we were so proud of it. We're like, yeah, that looks so clear and cool. And he's like, take that off. Yeah, that's good. Oh.
We used a lot of yellow dye, things like titanium tetrachloride, cyclohexylamine, and acetic acid, which is the sort of A and B smoke composition. And we found that by putting one chemical in one hit, another chemical in the other, when they exploded, the two chemicals mixed, and you got this sort of acid smoke.
I saw it the first time with Jim, Cameron, and Gail, and a lot of the guys that were doing the final checks on the sound and everything at Fox. And I saw the movie, and it was on a giant screen with a great sound and everything else. And I realized that Jim had designed it. He had pretty much was the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral in that movie. I mean, he really was. And I was so taken by it. It was such a tour de force that I couldn't say anything. I mean, I didn't even say I loved the movie. I mean, I was absolutely tongue-tied. And Jim and I walked down on the steps of the Fox screening room, and I said, Jim, I don't know what to say to you, but I guess what I got to do is just write you a letter, because I'd rather put it all in a letter. What I'd left omitted was that I love the movie, but that I really have to say a lot to you about it. And being a lazy actor, I didn't write him the letter, because the movie came out, it was a giant hit, and I sort of felt, well, whatever I have to say doesn't matter now. I mean, the reviews are there, everything is there, and for 6 months, Jim thought I hated the movie.
I remember me and Michael Biehn were over at Fox, and Jim had the whole movie just on a video cassette, not like a VHS cassette, but on one of those digital 8 cassettes, so that he could watch it on the plane flying back from London. He could just kind of watch it and study the cut. So we were wrestling on watching this thing, and about the size of a postage stamp, and it looked good on that. So we knew it was going to be great.
I was not supposed to see it. Well, we weren't supposed to see it yet. And I went into the projectionist's booth and watched it through a little window as they were projecting it for the press in New York City, or for somebody. So maybe it was a whatever audience, but I think it was for the press, because I remember we weren't, and I think Bill was there. He could probably tell you. Well, his memory's probably as bad as mine is, but he's always been full of energy, and he was like, God damn, man, that's a goddamn roller coaster ride, mother. It's huge, That's the way that Bill was. Home run, baby. Just like his character.
There were no test screenings for the film. We didn't have time.
The first time I saw Aliens was at the premiere down in LA. And I was kind of in a daze because I was 10 years old. There's all these movie stars around me, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who, it was just amazing.
We'd gone to the big hoopla, the big premiere screening. Hadn't seen the whole film before that. So we were all jazzed anyway, but I knew we had a hit movie because we were there with, it's all the suits. I mean, it was a tuxedo crowd that night.
Jim and I went to see the first midnight screening, because that's when a lot of the real fans come out.
I remember bumping into Stan and Jim, and they were making the rounds to the different theaters to see what the audience reaction was, and they both seemed very pleased, excited about what was happening.
We were standing in the back of the theater, and people were talking back to the screen, in a good way.
I was surprised that Sigourney got a nomination, only because it was so unusual for the Academy to recognize a science fiction, fantasy, and horror film. It's funny how this town forgets that these genres built this town.